Cyber Sidekicks, the weekly cybersecurity podcast hosted by Richmond Advisory Group's principal analysts, namely me, Christina Richmond.
And me, Rory Duncan. This podcast is your go-to partner for understanding the cybersecurity market, industry trends, and the real-world challenges of protecting organizations today. Hello, Christina.
Hello, Rory. How are you?
I'm not too bad, thank you. I'm fine. It's a Scottish
You're
fine today. You know,
Okay.
somewhere between, okay and horrendous. Something like that, It's not too bad.
Or fabulous. Somewhere
Fabulous
between
and
fabulous
horrendous.
and horrendous.
Yeah, fine covers all
Hey,
bases.
you put in our notes that our podcast audience is continuing to grow. Tell
Yes,
me
it
about
is.
that.
Yes. So I've been using the analytics. This has been with this new platform for a little while. So I wanted to have a look back. We have some regular listeners. We have our kind of dedicated, loyal followers. And we're in multiple countries as well. Obviously, a lot of our listeners are in the US, a lot in Europe. But we have quite a few listeners in Spain. So special shout out
Oh,
to our listeners in Spain, our cyber sidekicks in Spain, or should I say our compinches cibernéticos, who are our,
oh.
I know, so, uh, and to our Spanish guests and listeners, so I suppose it's like no más malware, por favor, or insert your
I think
threat there.
are we getting to the end of your Spanish?
That's it. Yeah.
That was it. Well, that was very good. Gracias.
Ah, thank you. I think the
Yes.
only other word I know
Yeah.
is pantalones. I think that's the only other one.
Pantalones. And we're not talking about pantalones today.
No, we are not.
Yeah. Thank you so much for listening in. We really appreciate you.
Yeah.
But we are going to talk today about many things. And one of the things that we thought we'd mention again is our free monthly newsletter,
Mm,
Signal, Not Noise.
yeah.
You can get your T-shirt next year at RSA.
Yeah.
Signal on the front, not noise on the back.
Yeah. For sure, and might maybe even sooner than that. So we're investigating
Oh,
the various on-demand options that are available, of which there are many. So stay
okay.
tuned.
Good to know, Rory. Yes.
Thank you. And then when you do
Yeah.
subscribe, we will be able to send you a special 4-page extract from our recent AI security survey update, which is the one that we introduced to some of our clients at RSAC. And that 4-page extract looks at how prepared CISOs, C-suite, and senior IT practitioners are to face AI-powered attacks and what would help them prepare. So that went down very well. If you do subscribe, we'll happily send you a copy of that.
Yeah, and then if you'd like a copy handed to you in person,
Mm,
you can get your very own 4-page AI security survey update from Rory, who will be at InfoSec Europe the 3rd to the 5th of June in London, right?
yeah, that's right. Looking forward to that. The AR and PR folk and others have been reaching out already, so it's turning into something that's going to be quite busy again, although on a smaller scale than something like RSAC. However, I do have beside me some slightly dog-eared,
Mm-hmm.
well-traveled copies of the 4-pager to hand out. So if you want to have a meeting,
They'll be
I'll
the
give you a
global,
copy.
yeah, they're
Yeah,
the global copies. They're the global
exactly.
copies that have been trotted around in a suitcase from
Exactly. They're a bit,
San Francisco.
yeah, that's right, well-traveled. They're
Well
a little
traveled.
bit folded at the corner and kind of a bit crushed and faded, but no, they're
They
actually
have more
fine.
meaning. They're
They do.
originals and they have more meaning. That's
Mm,
right. Hey, and then later today, we get to chat with Alex Pinto from Verizon's DBIR. And
mm,
I am so excited to chat with him because known him on and off through the years, and he and the team at Verizon are well known for doing the DBIR, the Data Breach Investigation Report.
mm-hmm.
And, I think we'll talk about DBIR for sure, but I also really want to chat about sort of the state of threat intelligence and AI.
Dun,
Again,
dun, dun.
AI.
Yeah.
Dun, dun, dun.
Oh, well,
So
I
look
think
forward to that in a few
it's all
minutes.
very timely given we've brought up a number of the different threat intelligence reports that have been published by a number of the big organizations. in our industry. So the IBMs and
That's
also
right.
others. So it's kind of all very timely. This time of year they tend to appear, and then of course one of our tasks is to then cross-reference that to see what common aspects that we can see, where are the common threats, what things are being highlighted, what is growing, what is more
What's
significant
different?
than last year. Yeah.
Yeah, what's different, less significant, more significant, but also what's different across the reports. Not that we do a huge mind meld on all the reports, but depending on the sources that the report uses, the data will be different.
Yeah.
And depending on what their aim or goal is with the report, the data will be different. Depending on what you, the practitioner, needs to understand, whether it's
Hmm.
by industry or customer size or types of attacks, you're better off using particular sources. If you're going to go look at just email, you might want just an email provider, for example, that and look at their report. So
Hmm.
anyway,
Yeah.
we'll have an interesting chat with Alex, I'm sure.
Yeah. Great. Look forward to that. So let's talk about some of the latest happenings in the news, Christina. And it's been a little while since we did, I think probably a couple of episodes since we did any news items. And there's been a lot happening, of course, in the industry, lots of announcements being made. And what I wanted to talk about here was, and not necessarily anything to do with the politics of it, but certainly in terms of the organization and the administrative side, is to talk about CISA and some of the changes in that
Right.
organization with the new administration. And I'll preface that by saying, here in the UK, we have similar organizations. And when a new government comes in or a new administration comes in, it's kind of all change. We've mentioned this before, new broom sweeping clean and so on. But at RSAC itself, there were a couple of speakers from different parts of the organization, previous and current, which is important to cover because many of those decisions that are made and opinions will form some of the legislation as we go forward. So, are you able to cover that? Just give us a brief kind of rundown of it, and then we can have a chat.
Yeah, it's one of those delicate topics, right? We don't want to uh, take a stand, right? We don't want to take a stand. Personally, we have our opinions, but in terms of political stands, we want to be as unbiased and balanced as we can be. But it was very interesting, the juxtaposition of having Kristi Noem, who is now the eighth Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, speak at RSA, and then Chris Krebs, who is being investigated by the current administration, also spoke on a panel at RSA. And so when I spoke with the organizers, they're like, yeah, we decided to represent both sides and invite both. We had already invited one and we decided to invite the other. And of course, they were in their separate times and rooms, if you will. So, in the interest of staying, kind of middle of the road and just presenting what I see as interesting tidbits, here goes. We'll see how it goes. You guys give us your comments if you think I've veered from the middle, which I might. Um, so Kristi Noem was South Dakota's 33rd governor and the state's first ever female governor. And I found her, just researching her bio and getting to know her background just a little bit. She's a pretty tough cookie. She's a beautiful woman. She presents very well, and you wouldn't know that underlying she's running a farm still. She's running a South Dakota farm. Her father was killed in a farm machinery accident when I think she was in college, and she did not finish college at that time because she took over the farm. So she's a tough cookie. What I felt about her speech was that she was, first of all, explaining who she was and talking about her background and why she's right for the DHS. And she was very specifically talking about the goal of CISA is to be operational, to protect both small and large entities, especially our critical infrastructure, right, from our largest attacker, China, and others, and to advise those small and large and critical infrastructure entities ahead of and during attacks. So she did a call out during that speech to the audience, and the audience was receptive. It sounded like it was large. I wasn't there in person, but listening back, it sounded like it was a large audience. She received applause. She received support from the audience, and she made sure to ask them to get involved. She said, "We want your suggestions. We want you to work with us. Please do write in and tell us what you need." That is our new head of DHS, and then we have a new head of CISA, a guy named Sean Planky. So he had served under Trump's first term as Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for, here's another long set of words, Energy's Office of Security, Energy Security and Emergency Response, known as CESER, CESER, which leads the cyber preparedness in the energy sector. So he does come out of a cyber background. Whereas Noam, yes, she did some things in South Dakota with cybersecurity, but she didn't really strike me as someone who really came out of the cybersecurity realm. Planky does have some background in cybersecurity. Planky also had been Deputy Chief Information Officer for the Naval Intelligence, a stint at U.S. Cyber Command, and positions in the Coast Guard. So, I think we do have some cyber background in CISA, which is the way it should be. And then in the DHS, Noam seems to be a strong leader. She is looking at how the money is being spent. And when we look at the $500 million that's been pulled out of CISA, well, that's a little scary, given the state of cybercrime and nation state attacks and how important it is for us to stay vigilant. But she did mention that there was a building that was being built, a new building. And I don't know if that was for the DHS or for CISA, but she's like, I'm looking at that. Do we really need a new building? And so I have to say, in the trying to stay balanced, it's not a bad idea to uncover expenses that are maybe not the right ones. She didn't throw anybody under the bus, at least not that I heard. Turning to Krebs received thunderous applause from the community. And so very different audience, right? So when he came out on stage, and again, I didn't get to be there in person, but I listened back to it. When he came out on stage, he obviously has the hearts and minds of the community. Now, I thought the community at RSA was very respectful and appreciative of Kristi Noem, and she did a good job for her first time out. Krebs, on the other hand, is well known and beloved. So he came out to chat with a panel, quite the all-star panel. And there's a great, I really recommend folks listen or read this SC World article. It's a pretty well-written article, and it starts with all-star panel. The legal and professional troubles didn't seem to faze Krebs, who cheerily introduced fellow panelists. Jen Easterly, who succeeded Krebs at CISA as director and now works at Evanstar Cyber. And I love what Jen has on her LinkedIn. She is the lead guitarist and CEO for Evanstar Cyber LLC. She's self-employed, but I love that she says she's a lead guitarist. She's always been quite the character. So she was on the panel. Rob Joyce, who is the former director of cybersecurity for the NSA, and he's currently a venture partner at Data Tribe, and then Michael Schmidt, who is a New York Times reporter and co-producer of the Netflix miniseries Zero Day. So those four people. So the article goes on and talks about the ostensible purpose of the session was to talk about the show Zero Day, and the miniseries, which debuted in February. They were talking about how it portrayed a fictional cyber attack that paralyzes American critical infrastructure and results in thousands of deaths. But the crowd was really there to see Krebs. But they also really did allow for wandering into Colonial Pipeline, which is right after that, Jen Easterly came on board. She's like, remember that panic that folks had, and the adversaries were watching us very closely. She warned that, we have to be careful with China. We don't want to use offensive cyber weapons against them because that could backfire. She said, we have to keep in mind that Xi and the Chinese people can withstand a lot more pain than we can. And she hearkened back to the ongoing real estate crisis they have, but also going back to, around 1960, the Great Leap Forward famine and the tens of millions of deaths that Chinese people went through. So, anyway, it's an interesting chat that they had. They also, brought up AI. It took about 23 minutes for them to get to AI. But at the end, they let Krebs say something very heartfelt, which was, I wasn't sure I was going to come, right? Because he is being investigated. But who knows? I don't want to go there too much. But he said, I made a promise. So I showed up and he said, I am so thankful to all of the people in the room. And you have all been hugely supportive, not just of me, but the community. And the community right now is in distress, it's under attack, and it's being picked at from all sides. He said cybersecurity is national security. Every one of you, I don't care if you're a sales rep, an engineer, whatever, you're on the front lines of modern warfare. So thank you for what you do on a daily basis. Please stay in the fight. Don't lose faith.
There's various things we could talk about. The one I wanted to mention was it's a report from Security Week, but it's been covered elsewhere, which is that the EU has a cybersecurity agency called ENISA or ENISA.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Perhaps they're certainly not as high profile as the US organizations. However, they exist, but they've launched this new database, a new European vulnerability database. And this has been viewed quite positively, and it should be a good resource. Most of the experts in Europe say, well, that's fine as long as there are resources there to keep it maintained and managed and updated, right? That's the thing about
Right.
databases. Unless it's every hour, every second, which of course is managed by third party companies and individual organizations. That's part of what they do. But from an EU level, who knows? Certainly, the reason it's there because this database has been mandated by the directive called NIS2, which is the EU's baseline framework for cybersecurity risk management and incident reporting, right? So we have legislation and regulation requirements. It means there's a directive. That directive says there has to be something that's maintained and updated. So, for that reason alone, it had to be created. And as long as it can be updated, fine. And the aim is that the database provides an aggregated, reliable, and actionable information resource, including
Mm-hmm.
exploitation status and mitigation measures, which is great if that all works and is kept up to date, because at the moment we're kind of relying on commercial firms to do this, whether they are specialist companies or vendors or service providers to do this. The other interesting thing, and it'd be great to get your feedback on it, but the other interesting thing is that this is free. It's a free and
Ah,
accessible to anybody. So it includes information, and this comes down to the part of this aggregated part, right? It's information sourced from vendors, from incident response teams, other vulnerability databases, such as CISA's Known Exploited Vulnerabilities or KEV catalog and MITRE's CVE program. So that's interesting that here is another source potentially, or perhaps for many EU countries, it's maybe one of the few that they are able to access directly, especially if their budgets are less. So I thought that was really interesting. Here's another database. This is great. Here, and it's free. That is also great.
and it's free.
Let's
Yeah.
see what
I
what.
think No, I think that's terrific. And I think having CISA's KEV catalog and the MITRE CVE program, which we discussed this a few months ago, was in jeopardy of losing funding, but
Mm,
money came through in the waning moments. Um, more data is good. Coordinated, contextualized data across multiple sources is good. I would love over time to see a much a more coordinated effort across global sources. And that's tricky. It's tricky even just in one country to coordinate from industry and government. It's a very, very tricky thing because folks, it's a lot of work, but it's also kind of, I'll show you yours if you'll show me mine or show you mine. So it's a challenge to I don't know where I'm going with this. I'm going to start again. I'd love to see a more coordinated global effort with databases like these. I don't think we will in the short term because it is a very difficult thing to do. But I also think it is a very valid set of capabilities that Europe has created with this EUVD. That's kind of a terrible acronym,
Yeah, it's
but
horrible.
but but
Please.
that's what it is. I mean,
Yeah.
couldn't they have come up with a nicer name? But yeah,
Oh,
European Vulnerability Database, or EUVD. And so, yeah, ANISA is now tasked with managing it effectively. But of course, they were, to your point, they were a CVE numbering authority, a CNA, since 2024. So they're getting the capabilities, the strengths to be able to do this. And over time, perhaps we'll see them coordinate more with other nations as well.
yeah.
So good on them.
So this week's special guest is Alex Pinto, Associate Director of Threat Intelligence at Verizon. Hi, Alex. Thanks for being on the show.
Hi, thanks for having me, Rory.
We're
Great.
so excited to have you on, Alex. And, Rory, Alex is one of the authors and leads the Verizon DBIR team. So it's really cool that we get to talk about the DBIR, but also the state of threat intelligence and these threat reports. So, Alex, am I right? You've been at Verizon since, how do you pronounce it? Your ML network detection company, NIDL or NIDO? How do you pronounce that?
Needle, yeah, it was a
NIDL.
pun on needle in the haystack. We thought we were very
Mhm.
clever at the time.
Very
I
good.
actually love that. That is really clever. So since 2018, 17 years you've been at Verizon?
No, that will
Is
be
that?
7. Please, I'm not that old. So,
Oh,
yeah,
I didn't do the math right. Well, that's funny. I really have only had one cup of coffee.
fair.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So listen,
it's very early in the morning, listeners, for Christina, so she has an excuse. If I
well,
do
it's
that, I don't
really
have any
not.
excuse, but for Christina, we'll let you off with that.
Yeah, it's actually 10 after 9. I should be more awake now. Anywho, so Alex, you and I have talked about the DBIR. We've talked about threat intelligence in the past. I know when I was at IDC, we would have the official meetings, the official briefings, and we're both security tinkerers, so we get to chat there as well. But I thought we could take this in kind of a different direction and have fun with it. I've been studying threat intelligence for 20 years. You've been in the space for at least that long. And it seems to me that a lot has changed. And there's certainly many more threat reports out there now than there used to be. And I think it's hard for readers to parse where the sources are coming from, what the focus is by a particular company, why one is the gold standard. DBIR is certainly the most quoted, the gold standard. But why is that? And where are we with threat intelligence? What thoughts do you have on that?
So, so first of all, it's one of those things like, what is threat intelligence? And then we could spend the whole time that we have allotted for something like that, right? I think
Yes. Okay, go.
the kind of the no, we're gonna skip right through that. I just made that as a
I
throwaway.
know.
But the so I think the thing about the DBIR and the reason why it is people keep going back to it, right? And they use it as a reference point is because we either have the curse or the privilege to have over the years been able to gain the trust and be able to work with now almost 100 different data contributors. And what that means, and that's what's the big differentiator for the DBIR? Why should people care about it? It's because this is not Verizon's data, or I should say, this is not exclusively Verizon's data. This is data that we actively try to work with the industry leaders of absolutely every aspect of information security you might imagine, and work with law enforcement, work with governments all around the world to try to get their perspective and their information, and then somehow it's always a miracle every year to weave it all into something that makes sense, something that is a narrative, right?
Well,
So
that's the
we,
magic pixie dust, Alex. That's the waving your magic wand over. I mean, to
yeah,
take 22,000, I think, is what the report said, 22,000
yeah, that's
security
correct.
incidents and 139 countries. And then how do you distill that down into the takeaways? What do you do? What is the magic wand?
So there's a couple of the biggest leverage point that we have there is the fact that for the past 15 years, I mean, Verizon created and has been using a framework that we call the Veris framework. And it's a way to break down the activity on a breach into its kind of core components, as in, okay, who did it? What did they do? Right? What were the targets of their activity and what was the outcome of what they did? So it becomes possible to break down even a complex breach in its component parts, and this all becomes part of a larger database where all the breach data goes in. So I'd say almost half of the work that we do every year comes into working with the partners and making sure that we can get their data into this specific format. And the way that this framework is put together, it's a hierarchical framework. So for instance, you can know for sure, oh, that company was affected by a malware attack, but you might not be sure what the type of malware is. So you can
Mm,
tag it as a malware, right? And say, well, I don't really know what the specifics are, but it's a malware. So that will, in our charts, in our statistical analysis, it will tally up for malware, right? But if you're looking for the more specific stuff, oh, this was a malware, but this was an info stealer, or oh, this was ransomware, it becomes these numbers roll up to malware for the bigger picture, but you can also look at them in the specific view. And so you'll get a tally of ransomware and info stealer of the ones we know the specificity of, but the ones we don't know, they get removed out of that view automatically by the way that we
mm-hmm,
built the analysis
mm,
engine. So it allows you to zoom in and zoom out very effectively. And this is incredibly important. And I mean, as you were alluding to the state of threat intelligence, right? The data that any data that you get in this field is like incredibly incomplete. And there's a lot of
right.
gaps, a lot of missing places. And it's not just um, differences from the groups we work with. Of course, some of them care more about some aspects of the breach than others. So there's like a natural selection, if you will, on what is the sort of data, where is the data more detailed, what they give us. There's such a base unknowability, so to speak, of breaches,
Mm-hmm.
right? We're always trying to literally a forensic analysis, right, to try to understand what happened. And sometimes we can't get the full picture, even if we do a great job. So there's a lot of uncertainty that's intrinsic to this kind of data. And so being able to collect all this data and being able to kind of weave an effective way to analyze data that is like by design incomplete, right, is kind of what allows us to have so many different things to choose from to talk about, right, and allows us to analyze the data in so many different ways like we do.
So some of the secret sauce is the Veris framework that you were talking about. And I remember over the years getting some good deep dive discussions on Veris. And it is pretty impressive how you're able to parse the data, bring it in, ingest it, dedupe it, normalize it, contextualize it, right? And that's some of the largest work that has to be done. I think one of the things that's challenging today is there are so many reports, right, as we said, and they have different takeaways. I think the brilliance of your data is that it is so broad and it is global, and it is in partnership with all varieties of companies and law enforcement, as you said. But there are other large companies. And so, one of the things when I was on the Verizon webinar, I was asking, well, why is it that another report has said ransomware is on the decline, and the DBIR is saying ransomware is on the, it's increasing. And I said, could it be the difference in SMB focused data versus enterprise? Because the other threat report that we've been talking about recently is the IBM threat report, which is very high end enterprise, and it's mostly through their own data. They do bring in OSINT, they do bring in some other sources, but and I'm not calling this out to say one is better than the other. They're both brilliant. I think CrowdStrike and Arctic Wolf and everybody has their perspective, which is so useful. I think the question, Alex, is what do Jane and Joe, normal analysts, make of it? How do they use it? How should they think about it when they're looking at each of these different reports?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question because in a way you already answered kind of the core of what you're asking, in the sense that those are all different perspectives. And like I said before, each company will specialize in some sort of specific view, some sort of specific segment, some sort of specific way that you analyze the data, right? So, I mean, it's very likely that, like you said, the IBM report will skew towards enterprise, right? And we'll be able to give them a view that is more appropriate to that. I think that you're asking the question in reverse, to be honest with you.
Probably.
I'll explain. I'll explain. Right. The truth, at least the way that I see it, is okay. What do you want to know? What is the kind of information you're looking for? And so depending on what it is, there are threat intelligence products that are way more appropriate for that than maybe even the DBIR, right? So let me give you an example, very narrow example, right? We started working with Mimecast this past year. Just an example. So we worked a lot with a company they acquired, which was called Elevate Security, of like behavioral engineering for security training. And they got acquired by Mimecast. And so now we're working with Mimecast a lot. They contributed some specific data points for us, which again, we leverage throughout the report as, oh, we need to give some additional detail. We need to do a little bit of a deep dive on this topic we're talking about. So their data looks like a good take to pair, so to speak, almost like a wine pairing, with what we're talking here specifically about the instance, right? But if you want to learn about the state of email security and all the specific details and all the ins and outs and all, the nitty gritty, yeah, please go read their reports because that's what they do, right? It's going to be very focused and very narrow. But is this
love
what you
that, Alex.
need? Do you know what I mean?
I love the wine pairing. So what is the meal that you're serving? Is it inclusive of email specifically? Do you want to know about email phishing? What is the meal that you're serving? And then think about the type of threat intelligence wine
Yes,
that you want to bring
that's
to that
kind of,
party. I
yeah.
love it. It was a great answer, and I loved that you said, we're asking the question backwards. And that's sometimes the challenge of an analyst is you go too far out in one direction, right? And then you need to reel it back in. So that was great. Thank you for that. I guess the next thing that I'm curious about is
Oh no, now
where
I made
are
her
we
mad.
in No, I'm not really. I'm not mad.
I'm
I'm
joking. I'm joking.
excited. You are. I know you are. I'm excited. And what but yeah, now I'm going to give you a tough question. Dun dun dun. No, I'm curious where we think threat intelligence is going. And this is harking back to when you first joined the call, and Rory and I were joking around about some AI agentic study. But truly, where do we think AI can be useful? I have my thoughts. I could throw out my answer, but I want to hear from you. Where is AI really helpful in threat intelligence, and where does it hallucinate potentially?
Well, let me start the answer by saying that I'm probably not the best person to ask this question because
And that's fine.
I'm a very hardened skeptic of generative AI in
Mm-hmm.
general. Having working
Mm-hmm.
many years with machine learning, like you just mentioned, right? I had a machine learning network detection company that was acquired by Verizon. We started doing that in 2012, right? So it's been a while. The most important thing I learned about working with machine learning and quote unquote AI was that it is a weapon of last resort in the sense that are you really sure you haven't tried everything else first? As in something that is deterministic, something that you can validate the answer, something that you can at least construct some semblance of trust in the process that you build in order to get the answer that you have. Look, there are a lot of different problems in both in threat intelligence and throughout the world where that answer is yes, actually we have tried everything. It is an intractable problem, so we might as well start guessing. And
Mm-hmm.
that's really the place I come from when I'm analyzing those kinds of tools for any sort of uh, purpose that they might be turned to, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So in one hand, right, asking your favorite chatbot to create you a limerick about threat intelligence is infinitely amusing, right? And there's no right answer, which is great. So anything comes out, you can like it on this or dislike it on its merits, right? But I personally have found that leveraging generative AI, even for the most common use case, which is summarization of a specific corpus document or on data that I care about, on data that I need to leverage for research, is that the error rate was unacceptable for the kind of work that I
Oh.
do, right? But we are insane at the DBIR in the sense that the first rule is that we have to be incredibly accurate, we have to be incredibly everything we do has to be very defendable. We're being read by I don't know how many thousands of people, right? You have no idea how many emails I get on oh, I think I found an error here. You did this wrong. I'm like, no, see, they don't add up to 100% because of this, which is fine. I mean, it's not like people are out to get us, but it's a very scrutinized document, as it should be, and we welcome that. So
Mm-hmm.
anything that would add uncertainty is not acceptable. It's not something we would like to
So let's
but
make
so go ahead.
it. Yeah, no, let's make a distinction between ML and Gen AI because they're different, and you do use ML. And so there's automation, there is mathematical,
Hmm.
I'm guessing, analysis that you use because humanly,
Of course.
I doubt that Verizon could do the analysis just with the 4,000 people you have focused on the DBR. DBIR, excuse me.
Yeah,
I knew I'd
yeah.
get a
Divide that
chuckle
by
on
a
that.
thousand, and you're getting closer.
Yeah, I know. No, so let's talk a little bit then about because when I say AI,
Hmm.
I'm old enough now to know that it started, back in the 50s, and it has, we've gained greater capabilities in ML and neural language programming and Bayesian theory, and on and on and on.
Hmm.
And
Yeah,
Gen
there we
AI
go.
is this blip, right? It's a blip that occurred over the last 3 years. So tell us a little bit about the automation, the way you can cull through the tens of thousands of data points you must have to get to make
Yes,
sense of it.
of course. So there's a lot of different things we do. One of the most visible ones in the report is what we call the instant patterns.
Mm,
So that is built out of I mean, it's not necessarily advanced or intricate, but it's just like there's a lot of like love into it. A clustering
mm,
methodology that we developed based on the Verse framework. Because again, the Verse framework has a lot of teeny tiny ways you can break the data down, but it just becomes a mouthful. Yeah, so those threats where you have an external actor and they leverage are hacking or malicious or malware action, and the asset they targeted is a server. So just like I've just wasted a bunch of your time.
The if-then
Yeah,
questions that you're trying to get the
correct.
answers to. Yeah.
And so no, but by clustering, understanding what the patterns are in the data, we could tell, oh, there is a very big cluster here we can find every single year, which we then called system intrusion. And the idea behind system intrusion is that, okay, someone quote unquote hacked or, quote unquote put, I mean, less quotes there, but put some malware on a server. They got access to the server itself. And from there, they pivoted and installed ransomware or something of the sort. And so we can put a category around this group of different selectors, different enumerations in Varus, and be able to tell a story about this. Look, when we look at this cluster, this is what's happening. So we tell people, if you care about ransomware, or I mean, everybody kind of should, but if this is something you're specifically concerned about, you should sit down and read the system intrusion section, because that will have the insights and the focus on that specific kind of threat. And things like social engineering becomes a cluster of its own. And we call basic web application attacks, which for years we've tried to find a better name. We haven't been able to, but it's the idea where you are only attacking the applications themselves. So there's a lot of harm you can do by just either using stolen credentials on an application or even breaking into it with some sort of exploit, but you've never compromised the underlying servers or the infrastructure, so to speak. You could do all the harm just based on the application. So a lot goes into feeding and caring for this clustering methodology. We review it every few years to make sure we're able to be useful, right? A lot of and I think that's kind of the underlying point here. Although I know I'm telling a very belabored story. So what is the kind of quote unquote innovation that you can put here that we believe will be useful? Will be able to make us tell the message in a more clear way, right? And so the idea of breaking it down, creating some big like logic groups that people can wrap their heads around, it becomes again easier to focus and be able to tell a more specific story. Because again, the curse and the blessing of something like Varus, you can just zoom in, zoom out, slice and dice in any different shape or form. How do you select? How do you choose what you're going to be talking about becomes a challenge. So we have a lot of automated code in our backend. And again, this is pretty like small kid stuff, right? But it's constantly looking for big differentials in the data year to year. And so it brings it to our attention, right? Oh, look, there was a shift in these categories under these verticals. So these are probably something you want to dig into, because either it's a very interesting thing you should be writing about, or it's a mistake and you have to fix it. You ingested the data wrong or something like that. Oh, that happens way more than you think.
No, I'm sure, because when you're dealing with so much data from so many sources that you're trying to bring to some level of usability within Varus, of course, it's going to happen. And I love the transparency of, stuff happens and we do have errors, and people do call us out on things. But we're here to serve, and that's what I'm hearing from you, Alex, is we want to be useful. Rory, I have hogged up this entire chat. Anything that you've been thinking about that we haven't covered that you want to jump in on?
No, I didn't want to interrupt the flow because it was very interesting. Yeah, great, Alex. We could probably continue talking for another couple of hours, I would imagine. But thanks again for coming on, and it'd be great to have you back again. Clearly, we only covered a few things, but there's a bunch of stuff that I know we'd like to talk about. So if you're happy to come back on at another later date, Alex, that would be great. But thanks for your time today.
Thank you. I'd love to come back. This was incredibly fun.
Great. Thank you, Alex.
Thanks, Alex.
Yeah, and we'll look forward to speaking with you again soon. Bye.
We will.
Thanks, Christina. It's another episode in the bag. That was great talking with Alex Pinto. That was fantastic. We'd
Oh,
like to
wasn't
have
he
him.
fun? Just
Yeah.
such a thoughtful, articulate, interesting gentleman. Thank you so
Yes.
much, Alex. Again, we really appreciate you coming on.
So thank you for that. And next week we shall be having Damien Archer on, and Damien's VP Consulting and Professional Services Americas for TrustWave. So that will be
Ooh,
another
that'll be
interesting one.
interesting.
Yeah,
You
for
know, it's a
sure.
very different conversation when we talk to someone in threat intelligence versus someone who is, working directly with the customer, trying to solve their issues, their problems, or someone
Mm,
who's in product management trying to create new products. They're very interesting and different discussions. So I like that.
Great. Okay. And also feel free to keep sending your feedback and suggestions, but also leave us a message. You can leave some feedback and suggestions via voicemail, which is a 90 seconds max. And that's through SpeakPipe. We'll share any messages that are not too spicy in the following episode. And you can get us at speakpipe.com/cyber_sidekicks. You can also send us an email. So Christina Richmond, that's Christina at richmondadvisorygroup.com, or me, Rory Duncan, that's Rory at richmondadvisorygroup.com. And with that, thanks for listening, and we look forward to you tuning in next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.